Hello, everybody. My name is Shannon Brody, and we are going to get started. So what we are talking about today is the control panel and management review here on the dashboard. I want to talk about technically how to work with the control panel and management review, and then I'm going to show you examples of things that typically happen or ways that best practices for using the control panel and management review. But before we do that, I just want to talk for a minute about why you would want to use these two tools. So at any time somebody logs into TouchStone, the very first thing they're taken to is this dashboard. And when you have control panels assigned, then the control panel would appear here under this header called control panel. So I have this control panel, manager of admin finance. If it's a managerial position, so if that person is a manager, they're going to see this section here called management review. And they'll see the employees, actual people's names, underneath their position title. So if they're a manager, they'll see this management review area. If they're not, then this box won't even be here, and all they'll see is their control panel. The reason why someone would want to use the control panel is, number one, for training purposes. So if they're a new employee, then for new employee training, the control panel is fantastic for. Also for ongoing training. So if new processes are implemented or things are innovated, or the employee just needs to be reminded of how to do something, they would use the control panel for that. So a manager would use the control panel to implement new processes that may be developed. The next reason an employee would use it is for reference purposes. So if they forgot how to do something, if they needed a form or a document and they wanted to make sure it was the most current version of that document or spreadsheet or form. If a manager, their manager has decided that they're, or has seen that they're not following the process and there's problems occurring because of that, that would be another reason that they'd go to the control panel to reference or review that process. There's a lot of things that all of us do that we don't do every day. We may do it once a year, we may do it as needed, which results in doing it once a month maybe, and you forget how to do things. So the control panel is in an ideal place where employees can go and remind themselves of what to do. This is all about implementing and using your processes. If you document everything in TouchStone and then you don't implement and get your employees to use those processes, well, then it's all for naught, really. So the implementation is the key to the success of your processes, and that's what the control panel is for. It's for implementation of the processes, the using of the processes. And there are huge benefits to that, some of which I'm going to go over here in a second. Management review, which is this area down here, is the place where managers make sure that the processes are implemented and used. So if the idea of documentation is for employees to be using the processes, well, then it's the manager's accountability to make sure they're using them. And there are some tips and techniques and management style and philosophy that are related to that, which we'll talk about. If there is no manager making sure that the processes are being used, well, then they're not going to get used. So I can't tell you how many times I've heard over all my years of doing this, people say, nobody's using them. Nobody's using them. I told them to use them. Nobody's using them. It's because there's not a manager there making sure. Generally, it's not because employees don't care. They're just insubordinate. They just couldn't care less about how their work. It's not that. It's because the manager hasn't enforced it. So I'm going to show you again some ways that managers can easily enforce things and make sure that processes are being used. And in fact, it's a management style that makes management easy, honestly. So when I say it's the manager's job to enforce it, it's not a negative, it's a positive. Because by the manager enforcing it, it's making their job easier. So let's talk about the control panel first. So control panels are assigned over here in account administration. So right here under user accounts, you set up your users here on the user list. You go to their name on the user list. You go up here to control panel, and then you choose the position that this person is accountable for. So what position do they fill on the org chart? The control panel doesn't have anything to do with what positions they have access to or the type of access. A manager doesn't need a control panel for every position in their organization. They just need it for their position. So if we go back here to the org chart, so since I'm the manager and I have a managerial control panel, I'm seeing that here, and then I see this management review area. So let's choose this. So when a control panel is selected, it takes you to the list of processes that the position or the person is responsible for. All of these processes are on the job description for the manager of admin finance. That's why they're here on this list. So this list of processes is derived from the job description. So if we go here to the org chart, and then I choose this position, this is the job description for the manager of admin finance, and these are all the processes that have been put on this job description. These are the same processes that are in the control panel. So if we add a process, I'm just going to choose one here randomly. Let's choose this one. If we add a process to this job description, I just added this weekly customer meeting process. Now we go back to the dashboard here, and we go back to this control panel. I'm now seeing that process here. If I was to delete this process from the job description, it's going to delete it from the control panel. So this is what I mean by the control panel processes are an exact reflection or a mirror of what's on the job description. First thing is, in your control panel, you want to create groups and organize the processes into those groups. So here is how you create a group. So you type in the name of the group, and then you hit save. So here's that group. It's going to appear at the top. If you haven't done this yet, all the processes are going to be in this called the default list. So this new one that I just added appeared in the default list. So when you create groups, you want to think of subject, like finance, management. You could do it by timing, like end of the year, quarterly, monthly. You could create groups by time, like from 8 to 10 or 10 to 12. So think about the position itself, and is that position time driven? If it is, then the groups are probably be great with timing or dates. If the position is not time driven, then think of subjects or both. Once you've created the groups, you can edit group titles right here. So you just click edit, then you choose the name that you want to edit, and then you type in the new name and hit save. So that's just changing the titles of the groups. You can also delete groups right here. So you just hit delete. You choose the name of the group that you want to delete. We'll choose this one, and you hit delete. So that's all the functionality related to creating and editing and deleting groups. Once you've added your groups, you can take the processes and drag and drop them into the correct group. So I just move this down by dragging and dropping it. Once all the processes are gone from the default list, when you refresh, then that default list just goes away. It will only reappear if you add a new process to the job description. You can also collapse the groups here. So I just hit the collapse. This is all the way in the right-hand corner here. This just allows you to see all the groups, and then I can click here and see the processes inside of one group. You can also reorder groups. So I can take this one and move it up and down to adjust the order. And if I hit expand here, then you're going to see them all. So reordering is for reordering the groups or also reordering the processes within a group. When you select a process from the control panel, like let's click this one, it then shows you all of the documentation that has been written for this process. So there's a checklist in this process, there's an uploaded file, there's some forms down here. All of this content was created over on the Process Tools page. So nothing can be edited or changed here, none of the content. All that happens here in the dashboard is processes are used. They're not created, they're used. On a process, you can also do this collapse. If the process has a lot of content in it, then this is a good way to kind of collapse it, and then you can go to, okay, I just want to see the checklist. Over here, these numbers show you how many tools are within, or how many forms you have. There's 3 here. There's 1 uploaded file. There's 1 checklist. When I click open just one tool, then it shows me all the tools within that. So there are 3 custom forms here. So the idea of the control panel is that the processes are used. So there's different ways that employees use these. Number 1, they can use it if they're being trained, obviously. They use it if there's something within it that needs to be completed. So there's a form in it, or there's a checklist in it. If there is a checklist or a form or a document, when they go to that, like here's this verbal written warning form, and they select it, it gives them a copy of the form, which they can fill out. So this is a verbal warning, so I just put in the name of the employee right here. Whatever you put in the save as right here is what you can search for when you run a report. Here's where I can put in notes. This is just an open field for notes. Then you go and fill out these various forms. So these fields are all live now, so I can fill all this out, and then I save it. Once something is saved, it'll date and time stamp it right here. So you see the date and time stamp. So it saved a copy of this back to TouchStone. When something's saved, you then see this little print button appear. So when I click the print button, it's just creating a PDF of this form. And once it's here as a PDF, I can print this if I want, or I can download it somewhere else. So when something is selected, here's a checklist. We'll just do that example. I go through and tick off these boxes as I do this. I could save this again as the employee's name, and then I save it back to TouchStone. Now a copy of this checklist has now been saved. If we go back here to the process, and you look over here to the right, there's a little button here called Completed. So this shows me all of the checklists that I've done so far. So if I wanted to add more to this checklist, say I didn't finish it, I just click it, and now it takes me back to that checklist, and I can go and finish filling it out, and then I save it again. If I'm having an issue with another employee that very next day and I need to go and fill out this checklist again, well then if I click the title here, it's giving me a blank copy of this checklist, and then I save this as the second employee's name, and then I fill it out. So every time you click the title of the process, it's giving you a copy, and then another copy and another copy that you would fill out and use. So here's another kind of advanced technique for this. Let's say I'm giving a written warning, and I want the employee to sign this because it is something that's important. And there's a section down here where they would sign it. So what I could do in that example is I'd fill out this form for that employee, and I'd go and save it. Then I hit this print button, which creates a PDF, and then I print it. And then the employee signs it. Then I scan it back into my computer, and I go back to the process in TouchStone, and I go to this uploaded file, which is called Signed Form Archive. So this is where I can archive forms. So how I created this is on the Process Tools page, I just uploaded a blank file, and it could be anything. It could be a copy of the written warning form in Word. It doesn't matter what format it is. And then when someone goes here, then I'd go upload completed file, and then I find it and upload it. So I upload the scanned copy, and then I save it. So I'd want to put the employee's name here. But now I've just uploaded that signed form back to TouchStone. So why this is useful is it gives me, as the manager, an archive of all of my discipline forms that I need to fill out and save. It's confidential because the only person who can access this in TouchStone, these archived forms, is me and my manager. It's useful for my manager because that person, if they want to make sure that I've done the forms or that they're there, they can go in and view them through management review. So that's just a little technique with uploaded files. These types of things that are custom forms that are filled out directly in TouchStone, well, when they're saved, there's no uploading of forms or anything. They're just directly saved back to TouchStone. So let's go back here. Let's do another example. Compensation plan. So let's say I do this compensation plan annually. So here's the uploaded file for the compensation plan. I would click it, and then if I hit View File, then TouchStone's now opening the compensation plan. And this could just be a template that I fill out. If this was, I'm just going to do a File Save As. If this was 2019, the compensation plan for 2019, so now I've saved this document, and I'd go Uploaded Files, and I find it right here. So now I'm just uploading this, and I probably save it as 2019 comp plan. Now I saved it. Now if I go back to this compensation plan and I go to completed, if I want to look at last year's, then I can click here and see last year's. And then if I do it for 2020, then I save it, and this is an example of that. Now 2020 is saved here. So again, this gives me, I know right where to go to get the spreadsheet for the compensation plan. I don't have to look through my files, look through folders on my network. It's right here in TouchStone. And then when I complete it and save it back to TouchStone, now next year I can go and access it to then create the following year. And also my manager can go and view the compensation plan just by running a report. A person can say comp plan 2020 or 2020, and they would be given a link directly to this uploaded file. So rather than me emailing my manager the compensation plan in a spreadsheet, now we've got two copies of that in a sense, because I have the original one that's on the network, and now that person's got one, and then they do a save as, now they have it, and maybe they make some changes to it and send it back to me. Now there's 4 copies of it. So this is just another way to utilize the dashboard functionality to keep one copy of things, not just documentation, but the actual use of that. The spreadsheet's always here. Let's do another example. This process, key performance indicators. So these are the key performance indicators for finance. I can look here to say I do these monthly or even annually. I can look here to see the definitions of the key performance indicators in case I forgot. How did I calculate that last year? How do we calculate them? Well, it's all here. And if I only do this once a quarter or once a year, I may not remember how to calculate them. Rather than having to go and ask somebody or try to figure it out and make mistakes, it's all right here. So I would use this for reference, and then I would go to the document, and I click open the document, and I can call this, let's see, Q4 2019. And then I go and fill this out. What was the previous period? Maybe it was 80%. That was the quarter before. What's the current period? 95%. What's the difference? It's a plus 5%. So I fill all this out for each of my key indicators, and then when I save it, it's saving a copy of this form back to TouchStone. Here again, same idea as the compensation plan. My manager can now go and look at this. If they're wondering if I did it, it's right here inside of TouchStone. They just search for it and they find it. This is a custom form for key indicators. It's the same idea, except for it's been built in the custom form. This is just another version, just another way to do it. So employee morale here, I can put it was good. And then here's the reasons why. Why did it change? Why was it good? This is employee turnover, so it gives me ranges here. So it's 5 to 10%, or it's 0 to 5%. And then this is where the why is. Employee training. So you just go through and create this custom form with all the indicators like this, either ranges or good, fair, poor, and then the explanation is given, and then it's saved. This kind of stuff is really useful for strategic purposes, for analysis. It's something a manager should do. They should measure the results of their department. I've even seen this done by employee. So the employee on a quarterly or even annual basis reviews their own performance in an indicator fashion like this. The results of indicators like this, and this is just an aside, can be directed back to processes and the need for process improvement. So if employee morale is poor, then we can take a look at what are the reasons that are causing that and what kind of processes can we put in place to make it better. And this can be done all throughout the company. It's called continuous improvement. So let's go back here again. So there are any number of reasons for using the processes in the control panels. It could be if something needs to be completed. It can be if I need to track something that's happening. It can be for reference purposes, like we talked about with the key indicators, things I've forgotten because I don't do that much. It can be for planning purposes, like this one-on-one meeting process. If I'm doing this once a quarter or once a month with every employee, I can go down here to the agenda form, and I can fill out this agenda form, preparing for the meeting, and then save it. So this is a manager preparing for managerial work that they need to do. And then again, if my manager is ever worried or interested in whether I'm doing my meetings or not, then it's all here inside of the control panel for them to run a report on and see. A lot of HR things are great inside of the control panel. So onboarding and onboarding checklists, interview questions and responses to those questions, making sure that you've followed every step when someone's getting fired, new employee introduction and orientation, tracking that. Material delivery, like if I forget, how do I order the materials? I haven't done that in a while. I can go here and figure it out. So that is the use of the control panel in a nutshell. You may have some positions in your company who just use this for training purposes. In other words, there's nothing in it for them to complete. You've decided not to do that for whatever reason. So there may be positions that are like that, but still, that employee should have a control panel and should have a way of accessing their processes. So let's talk about this in the framework of management for a second. So you heard me say over and over again, if my manager wanted to check to see if that was done, if my manager just wanted to reference that that was finished. A manager's job, like I said in the beginning, is to make sure that employees are getting their work done. Typically, the only way a manager knows that is if there's a problem. So they may not even know that I have not done a verbal and written warning until that employee gets fired, and then the unemployment company is calling and saying, "Well, you're going to have to give them benefits because you didn't fire them correctly." Or I want evidence that that person was taken through a review that gave you a reason for firing them. Now, if I haven't been doing that, my manager won't know until it's too late. And there are a plethora of examples like that. The fire's burning, everyone's rushing around to put it out. The manager didn't know that it didn't get done because they had no way of knowing. Managers that run around trying to check verbally, how's it going? Give me that. Let me see that. That's craziness management. So completing things in the control panel, when employees do that, it gives the manager some evidence that that was done. I mean, it has a whole other host of benefits. But for a manager, it's evidence that things were done without them having to be there making sure, without them having to see it. They have evidence that it was done. So management review is a place where this person, in this example, the manager of admin finance, can make sure that this work is getting done. They can go over here and run reports. So I can go to management review here, and I could run a report of Mary or Sally or all my employees. I can choose them individually. If I don't choose them, it shows me everybody. I can give it a date range, so the week or the month that it was supposed to be done in. I can search the Save As right here. I can search for just checklists or forms or files, and then when I hit Run Report, I'm going to see a list of everything that was done. So these reports, you can run control panel reports, which would be of your own work in your own control panel. So if I go here to control panel, and then I search, what is today? The 21st. We'll just do this to be safe, and then I hit run report. Now I'm going to see all these things that we were just going through. So here's the 2020 compensation plan. Under uploaded files, here's checklists. These that say untitled weren't saved as anything, so it appears as untitled. This was a real life example. You'd want to save them as something. Here's documents. So I can run reports of my own control panel activity, or here under reports, I can run management reports, which allow me to see what my employees are doing in TouchStone. So let's go back here to the dashboard. So let's talk about training for a moment, because this is one of the big places that TouchStone shines. One of the key things that you can get out of TouchStone is the ability to train your employees thoroughly. So when you have documented processes, it allows you to train your employees with those processes. The processes are the training. There's no need to have additional processes. The documentation of the process is the training. And employees can review that documentation to then learn their processes, learn the work that they're accountable for doing. So let's say, for example, we just hired a new customer service person, Sally here. So the first step the manager needs to take is to create Sally, give her a username and password to TouchStone, and then give her a control panel for the customer service position. Now, if the processes in customer service are completely documented, well, then that's fabulous, because that gives her a thorough training. Even if they're not all documented, it's still a good idea to go through these steps of setting up the new employee in TouchStone, and then giving her a training in how to use TouchStone. It's pretty straightforward. And then have her start using the processes in TouchStone. So let's talk about new employee training first. I'm in management review right now. I'm Sally's manager. So before she starts her first day of work, I would look at all of her processes here. This is everything she needs to be trained in, all these processes. She also needs to be trained in the public processes. That's why they appear here in management review as well. So what I'd want to do as her manager is I would structure the training. So I could go here under group, and I could call this week 1 and save it. So let's say I've decided it's going to take her a month to learn all of her processes. So I'll break the trainings up into weeks. This is week 2. Now, this could be months of training, too. It just depends on how complex the position is. It could be days of training for things that are really simple. So the manager needs to decide how long it's going to take to thoroughly train this employee. If you've never done it this way before, there may be some guessing that goes on around how much time it's going to take. So then the manager would decide what's going to be trained first, second, and third. So what needs to happen in week 1. And all I'm doing is dragging and dropping these processes down into these groups. So the manager is thinking about each of these processes individually and deciding what can be trained in a week. So time is important here, how long it would take, and then put it in some order that makes sense. So maybe clocking hours should actually be in the first week because that's something that needs to happen when someone first comes into work. So things like that. Maybe these 2 processes should be trained together because they kind of relate to each other. Maybe this one can't be trained till the end because it's basically a to-do list of all of this. So think through it like that. Also think through by time. So what I'm saying by putting these 3 processes here in week 1 is that all 3 of these someone should be able to learn that in 1 week. A competent person who meets the minimum requirements should be able to learn this in 1 week. When you refresh, which I'm doing right now, the default list goes away, and then all the person sees is these processes in these training groups. So now let's log in as Sally here so you can see what it looks like for her. So when she first starts, the manager log out. After she's gone through her new employee introduction and orientation, then she's given access to TouchStone. The manager sits down and logs in with her. So this is what it looks like when Sally logs in. She could be instructed, first of all, to go through the public processes and just read them. A lot of times this is just reference information. It doesn't need a whole lot of hand-holding around it and extra training. It's just for reference. Someone can read the management philosophy. They can go and see the employee handbook. They should have already signed this by now. But here, she sees her control panel. If you look to the left here, this is all simplified as well. So Sally doesn't have access to the 4 key functions. She doesn't need access to that. She does have access to the org chart, so she can look at the org chart and kind of see the structure of the company, which is important for every position. These are all grayed out because she doesn't have access to those. The only one that's illuminated here is her job description. She could go and look at this job description. She could go to the processes and look at those. She could run reports of her control panel and search for things. But most of what happens here for her, if not all of it, is here in the control panel. So when she goes to the control panel here, if all these processes have been documented, this is her training. This is a thorough step-by-step for everything she needs to know. Now, I would say, just off the cuff, that about 80% of what most employees do can be systematized. There can be a process documented around it. Depending on the type of position, and I'm sure people can argue with me about this, somewhere around 10 to 20% are things that are project related. They're kind of one-off things. They're work that isn't necessary to have a process for. So a certain percentage of things fall into those categories. But around 80% of what everybody does can be documented to one degree or another. With that said, if all these processes are documented, she should be able to walk through these weeks of training and learn her position. This is very powerful for a manager, and it goes back to that original thing that I stated, which is managers are responsible for making sure their employees are getting their work done. That's all they do. They're making sure that the employees follow the processes to get the results. They manage them through that. So if that's the case, then this that we're looking at now is the most fabulous training tool a manager could ever ask for. So Sally sits in front of the TouchStone in week 1, and she learns the clocking hours process, how to use the time machine or how to use the online app to track her hours. She then learns how to do customer complaints. So she would go to this process. She'd look at the work plan right here, and she'd start to study the steps. So what do I do first? Locate the customer's invoice. I complete the checklist that's associated with this. She can even right-click this. All I did was right-clicked it. It's going to open this in a second window, and this is the actual customer complaint checklist that's filled out. And this can be saved as she did it. She can even type in done here. That's a good thing she can save it, which date and time stamps it, but for the manager, if you have a word, which means done, finished, something like that, that's the indication that she feels comfortable with this, filling out this checklist. And then we go back here. You go locate the customer's invoice. She'd figure out how to do that. Gather the following information. She'd figure out how to do that. One thing that might happen through this training is she might be coming to you saying, how do I gather this information? This isn't telling me that. Well, that doesn't mean that this doesn't work. Let's throw it out the window. All that means is this work plan isn't thorough enough. So through training someone in it, you can learn what would be better about it. Let's say that this customer complaint processing work plan didn't exist yet, and she's going to be trained in how to handle customer complaints. Rather than have her go here and just review what's already been done, you can have her go through the org chart here, go to her job description, click on that process, customer complaints, and then as she's learning it, have her write it down. When people are training with what we call the tribal method of training, where it's just passed down from one person to the next over time, and the elders are really the only people who know this, but it's all word of mouth, it's all what's in everyone's heads. When another person is learning through that tribal method, which is typical when you don't have documented processes, they're generally making notes about what the other person is saying. If they're not, then that's a huge flaw. They can't memorize everything someone's saying as they're saying it, so they're generally making notes. Why not have them make the notes here? Why not have them go and write out the tasks or the steps while they're learning it? There's no reason for them not to do that. So for these processes that haven't been documented yet, they can build them as they're learning them. But back to the example of when they are documented. So Sally's going through and she's, okay, I've done this. I completed the checklist. I got that. I'm going to go look at this script. I'm going to memorize this. The manager may sit with her and say, okay, let's role play it. This is the prompt. The customer's complaining because something took too long. What do you do? What do you say? They may listen to someone else do it. So the documentation is like the textbook that someone is learning off of, but then there might be other things that are done to enhance the training. So practicing, watching someone else do it, doing role plays. So they would ultimately memorize this script, and when she felt confident with it, she just puts done on that, and then she goes to the next script, the frequently asked questions. She takes a look at the forms that are in this and makes sure she understands where to find the work order, how to fill it out, how to describe the complaint thoroughly. When she's got that, same thing, she's done with that. So this may take days for her to go through and learn this, but basically over time she's combing through every tool. She'd go and review the policy and say done. She'd go to the training video and watch it and then put done. So this is the manager evidence that she said, yeah, I watched this video. Yeah, I listened to these audio files. When she feels confident in the process, she can even take a test. So this is a customer complaint new employee test that was built with the document tool. So the manager went and built it over here inside the process. So now she's going through and completing this test. So how do you begin a customer complaint conversation? How does that begin? She'd answer that. So she'd type in her answer here. What are examples of things not to do? Give excuses. What are the steps when when the conversation's over? What does she do? So she's having to do fill in the blank or answer multiple choice, and then she saves it. So Sally would go through each of these processes and study and memorize them, ask for help, and in week 1, she'd be trained in all 3 of these. We're going to log back in and see what it looks like from the manager's side, but another point I want to make here is if an employee's training is structured this way, and the manager is fairly confident that these 3 things should be able to be learned in 1 week's worth of time, so 40 hours, this is a great strategy and hiring tool for any business because, first of all, as a manager, if I've hired Sally and she can't even get through customer complaints in 1 week, so we ran out of time because she was having so many problems learning it, well, then that might be a sign to me that we've made a bad hire. And I'm going to know that in the first week. So that's huge because a lot of us, when you train people, you're just hoping they get it. And then it takes months and months to realize, because there's no documentation, that they're not understanding it. And then suddenly they just don't do customer complaints anymore because they're actually better at other things. And then you're kind of shaping the customer service position around what turned out to be this person's real abilities. And the thought of firing them is so excruciating because then you have to go back to the drawing board and retrain someone. So it gets to be this scenario where you're keeping people who aren't productive and aren't the best employees just because it's comfortable. So this helps you weed those people out right initially, right off the bat, and start over. Another thing it does is if we put time to all these processes, training time, and then we add up all the hours, what we're paying that person, and then we add the overhead, the management time, suddenly you can roughly see what it's costing you to hire and train a new customer service person. And those of you who have tried to grow your business or grow departments, you know it's a delicate balance between having enough money to hire that person and then having them generate enough to make themselves worthwhile. Oftentimes you're spending ahead of the curve. So if you could know almost exactly what it's going to cost you to hire this person and have them fully trained, well, that's beautiful. That just shows you, how to scale your business and what it's going to cost. So let's log out as Sally here and log back in as her manager. So we see her down here. So if we've gone through week 1 and I've gone over here and I've run a report, so at the end of the week, I would run a report and I would say, show me everything Sally did this week, which is basically by running this date range what you're getting. And I would choose her and hit run report. I would see, okay, she's done with these 2 work plans. She's done with the checklist. She memorized the script. She's reviewed these files. She's agreed to this policy. She's watched these videos. If she had done the test, I can see the test right here. So I can go through and review that she's done this test. I can print it if I want to. So I looked through all this information, and I'm confident that she knows the customer complaint process. So then I would go here to her in management review. I would click this process, and then I'd mark her as trained. You can even do these individually. So you can go to an individual work plan, and instead of marking them all, you can mark just this one as trained, and you can also keep training notes here and then save them. So some processes are easy. She learns it in one fell swoop, and then she's train all. Others are more complicated and take longer, and you may train individual work plans one at a time. And you may want to keep notes about the training, which you can view over here once they're saved. So these little green check marks appear next to the processes, like this. And then when Sally logs in and goes on to learn client satisfaction, she sees these check marks here, which is a sign to her that she's done. Once the new employee training has occurred, I would then go and get rid of these weeks. So I would just go delete. So let's say she finished week 1, like she's done with all of the training. I would delete the weeks. And when you delete a group, it's just putting all the processes back in the default list. So you see what's happening? Delete, and then I delete this group, and it's putting them all back into one clean list. And then I would sit and put these into categories just so they're easier for her to reference and find. So you could create a group and call it customer support or customer service, and then take things that are just related to that, like this complaints process and the customer satisfaction. You could do one called admin and put those into it. So after the training is over, then go in and clean this up and get rid of the weeks and make it more by subject area where it's easier for her to find things. She can do this herself too. So she logs into TouchStone. She's allowed to go and edit the groups. So let's go back here for a minute. So that's new employee training. There's also a value in management review for ongoing training. So let's say that I, as the manager, have implemented a new process for my department. So let's say that the clocking hours process, we got new software for that, and it's just for my department. I could document the clocking hours process with 5 or 6 tasks on how to do that. Then I would send an email out to my department, or in the department meeting, I would say there's a new clocking hours process on your job descriptions. I want you to go to your control panel and read it and mark that you did. So the employee would go to, I'm just using this one for example, they would go to, or the manager would go to the new process, let's just say it's this one, and I would read and study this information. I'd go through the checklist or the form, everything that's changed, and then I would say done. And then my manager could run a report at the end of the week and make sure that everyone had done that as they. You can also do like policy notes. So if there's a new policy for something, the manager can say, hey, I put a new policy inside of the written warning process. I want all the managers to go and read that policy and agree to it. So anytime a process is innovated, made better, or it's a new process altogether, that's ongoing training. And that can all be done through the control panel. By telling the employees, go to the control panel, find that process, read it, you're reinforcing the documentation, and you're also reinforcing their need or your desire to have them using the processes in TouchStone. You can also use ongoing training and management review for correction or for direction. So if I have my department here, these people, and let's say Sally's been with us for a year now, and when I've been getting complaints from the operations department that the cleaning she's supposed to do of the walkways isn't done, or the waiting room isn't done. Or I walk in and I notice that, the magazines are all out of order and there's never any coffee made. I could say to Sally, hey, Sally, go into TouchStone and just review the general cleaning process for me. You're missing some steps. So look it over and then let's have a conversation about it. Look it over and pay attention to the timing of when the coffee is supposed to be made. So this is a pretty, this is a pretty simplistic example, but these kinds of things are very real world. Let's say she's not following the clocking hours process, and when the payroll clerk is going to create her paycheck, they can't do it because her hours aren't clocked correctly. Well, now that's causing dysfunction within the finance department. It's creating loss of productivity because the payroll clerk is then going to their manager and saying, the customer service people, they never do this right. It's causing me this problem and that problem. And now that manager is complaining to me because my people aren't filling out the form right. And then it's brought up in the managers meeting because it's such a hassle for everyone. Now we've spent how many hours about this one issue? So as the manager, I would say I have two choices. I could say to Sally, God damn it, you never follow that process right. It's calling this problem and that problem. What is wrong with you? I told you 50 times. You already reviewed it. You know it's in TouchStone. Why aren't you following it? That's not a good way to manage people. It's the management everyone hates. It's why didn't you do that right? You're so terrible. I'm getting grief from my manager because of you. It's all emotional. Another way to do it is to say, Sally, go to TouchStone and review the clocking hours process. Let's talk about what's not clear about it, or let's talk about what needs to be added to it. Let's talk about why it's not working. So we're having this problem. Let's talk about why it's not working. So that's a different kind of management. I'm not mad at her. I'm not saying it's you. It's all your fault. I'm saying, listen, let's look at this together and figure out what the problem is. So two things can happen with that kind of interaction. One, I can figure out what's going on with Sally that's making this not work. Or number two, I can discover that the clocking hours process just isn't that good. It's not clear enough. So that we can innovate it together. So use TouchStone as managers. Use it as a way of directing and influencing the way that your employees do their work. Use it for reference. Another thing, and I'll end with this, another thing that's very common with managers is we become the answer people for everything. So can you review this report for me? Can you tell me what's missing? Did I do this right? I forgot where this is. Or I'm talking to this person on the phone right now and they want me to do this and this for them. How do I do that? I can't remember. Where is this? It's this ongoing, what do you think about this? Now, some of that is strategic, so you can sit down and have a conversation about it, but the majority of that is employees not taking ownership for their own work. It's not being accountable. It's laziness in some situations. It's not always the employee's fault either. Oftentimes it's the manager's fault because some managers are, let me do that, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. They're afraid to fully let it go, or they like being the answer person. It's unconscious a lot of the time, but they make themselves indispensable by not allowing other people to own what they're supposed to be doing. So managers can use TouchStone to get rid of this bad habit. So if Sally comes to me and says, how do I clock my hours? I just can't remember. I'm not going to go and show her. I'm going to say, go to TouchStone. It's all there. It's in TouchStone. If she says to me, where's the master schedule? I can't create the new schedule because I don't know where it is. I'm not going to just find it for her. I'm going to say, it's in TouchStone. Go look. There's directions on where it is in TouchStone. So make your employees own what they're accountable for. And you can truly do that in a really stellar way by referring to TouchStone, because it's all in TouchStone. It's all here. There's no reason to answer their questions. It might take a little extra time. They may have to call that person back who's on the phone. I mean, and that is what everyone's afraid of. Well, the manager's going to take too much time. They're going to have to call that person back. Well, let me guarantee you that if you make them call that person back and go review TouchStone, figure out their own answer, and then deal with it, it's never going to come up again. The issue with just answering it is it's going to come up over and over and over. So use TouchStone as a way to make the employees own what they're accountable for. And when all those processes are documented in TouchStone, and when people are using Control Panel, then that is a successful management style. Managers need to manage the processes, and these two tools, Control Panel and Management Review, are just essential. They're built exactly for that purpose. So thanks for coming, everybody. If you want to learn more about using TouchStone's management tools. Always remember there's the Resource Center right here. So there's user guides, which have a step-by-step for all the technical things. Here in the videos section, there's, if you're new to TouchStone, the Getting Started videos are pretty good. There's this section called Process of the Week right here. So this highlights library processes. And here under Guiding the Business, there's a lot of little 15-minute videos on management processes and how to implement and use those, how to download them from the library, and then how to use them. So remember these Process of the Week videos. In addition, remember TouchStone University. So this is going to be starting again in January. And the focus of TouchStone University for the first quarter of next year is going to be twofold. One is management, so how to use TouchStone to manage. And number two is how to train your employees to document processes. So in order to accelerate the process documentation, how to get your employees involved in actually being the ones that document those processes. So these are short trainings. They're half an hour at the most, and you can register for one or all. So look for those coming in 2020.